Welcome to Crimes Beyond Borders, where we'll bring you the most thrilling true crime stories every single day. If you're fascinated by mystery, intrigue, and the darker side of human nature, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us as we unravel the most shocking and perplexing criminal cases from around the world. The story is about to begin after this intro.
From city streets to far-off lands, mystery slipping through our hands. Crimes beyond borders they speak, voices strong but words are meek. Every story leaves a mark, whispers softly in the dark.
Our stories at first are made for ourselves, to comfort us, to help us sleep, and to learn. Along the way, they become a part of our journey, teaching us English and fueling our passion for true crime. So, listen carefully, and if you're about to sleep, close your eyes. Let's begin. The Maguindanao Massacre: Politics, Power, and a Nation's Quest for Justice. On November 23, 2009, in the province of Maguindanao in the southern Philippines, 58 people, including 32 journalists, were brutally murdered in one of the most heinous acts of political violence in modern history. Known as the Maguindanao Massacre or Ampachuan Massacre, the killings were not only shocking in their brutality, but also revealed the deep-rooted problems of political dynasties, impunity, and the use of violence to maintain power in the Philippines. This massacre was a chilling reminder of how political power is wielded with deadly force in some regions, and it sent shockwaves throughout the country and the world. The journey to justice, however, would prove to be just as tragic and arduous, as the families of the victims faced years of delays, corruption, and intimidation. The political landscape of Maguindanao. To fully understand the events of the Maguindanao Massacre, it is essential to grasp the political and social context in which it took place. Maguindanao, located on the island of Mindanao in the southern Philippines, is a region plagued by poverty, armed conflict, and political violence. The province had long been controlled by powerful political clans, the most notorious of which was the Ampachuan family. For years, the Ampachuan family ruled Maguindanao with an iron fist. Led by Patriarch Andal Ampachuan Sr., the family wielded immense power and influence, controlling not only the provincial government but also the local police and military forces. The Ampachuans built their political dynasty through a combination of patronage, intimidation, and violence, eliminating any opposition to their rule. They were staunch allies of then-President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, who relied on their political machine to deliver votes in national elections. In exchange, the Ampachuans were given a free hand to rule Maguindanao as they saw fit. The 2009 gubernatorial election in Maguindanao was expected to be a coronation for Andal Ampachuan Jr., the son of Andal Sr., who was being groomed to take over the governorship. However, a challenger emerged in the form of Esmael Toto Mangudadatu, a member of a rival political clan who sought to break the Ampachuan stranglehold on power. Mangudadatu, the vice mayor of Buluan, dared to run against Andal Jr. in the upcoming election, a decision that would prove to be deadly. The prelude to the massacre, a journey to file candidacy. On the morning of November 23, 2009, Esmael Mangudadatu made the fateful decision to send a convoy to the provincial capital of Sharif Aguac to file his certificate of candidacy for the governorship. Mangudadatu had been receiving threats from the Ampachuan family, who were determined to prevent him from challenging their political dominance. Fearing for his life, Mangudadatu did not travel with the convoy himself. Instead, he sent a group that included his wife, Jenilyn Mangudadatu, and several female relatives, believing that the Ampachuans would not harm women. Accompanying the Mangudadatu family members were a large group of journalists who were there to cover the filing of the candidacy. In total, there were 58 people in the convoy, including lawyers and civilians. The presence of journalists was intended to provide an additional layer of protection, as Mangudadatu believed that the Ampachuans would not risk harming the press. At approximately 9 a.m., the convoy departed from Buluan and began its journey towards Sheriff Aguac. However, they would never reach their destination. The massacre, a scene of unimaginable brutality. As the convoy made its way through a remote stretch of road in the town of Ampatuan, it was stopped by around 100 armed men, many of whom were members of the Ampatuan family's private army. The gunmen, led by Andal Ampatuan Jr., forced the occupants of the convoy out of their vehicles and took them to a nearby hilltop. What happened next was nothing short of a massacre. One by one, the victims were executed. Some were shot at close range, while others were mutilated. The gunmen spared no one. Men, women, journalists, lawyers, and even passers-by who had the misfortune of being on the same road were killed. Many of the women, including Jenilyn Mangudadatu, were sexually assaulted before being murdered. The journalists who had been documenting the events were among the first to be targeted. Their cameras and equipment were smashed, and they were shot in cold blood. The bodies of the victims were hastily buried in shallow mass graves dug by a backhoe, which had been brought to the site in anticipation of the killings. The backhoe, it was later revealed, was owned by the local government and had been placed at Andal Ampatuan Jr.'s disposal. The killers attempted to bury not only the bodies, but also the vehicles used by the convoy in an effort to conceal the crime. In total, 58 people were killed, including 32 journalists, making it the single deadliest attack on the press in history. The brutality of the massacre sent shockwaves throughout the Philippines and the international community. The sheer scale and brazen nature of the killings made it clear that this was no ordinary crime. It was a calculated political assassination carried out with impunity. The aftermath, outrage, and arrests. News of the massacre quickly spread, triggering a national and international outcry. Human rights organizations, press freedom groups, and the families of the victims demanded swift action and justice. The Philippine government, under President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, was forced to respond as the massacre had become a national crisis. In the days following the massacre, pressure mounted on the Arroyo administration to hold those responsible accountable. Initially, the government was slow to act, likely due to the close ties between the Ampatuan family and the president. However, as outrage grew, the government had no choice but to take action. Andal Ampatuan Jr. was arrested on November 26, 2009, and charged with multiple counts of murder. In the weeks that followed, his father, Andal Ampatuan Sr., and several other members of the Ampatuan clan were also arrested and charged with orchestrating the massacre. The Ampatuans denied any involvement in the killings, with Andal Jr. claiming that he was being framed by his political rivals. Despite the arrests, the road to justice would prove to be long and difficult. The Ampatuans had deep connections within the local and national government, as well as significant financial resources, which they used to delay and obstruct the judicial process. Witnesses to the massacre were threatened, bribed, and in some cases killed. Lawyers representing the families of the victims were also targeted, further complicating the quest for justice. The fight for justice, a decade-long battle. The Maguindanao Massacre trial became one of the longest and most complex legal battles in Philippine history. The sheer number of defendants, witnesses, and pieces of evidence made the case an enormous challenge for the prosecution. In total, more than 100 people were charged in connection with the massacre, including members of the Ampatuan family, local police officers, and members of the private army. One of the most significant hurdles in the trial was the culture of impunity that had long pervaded Maguindanao and other parts of the Philippines. The Ampatuans, like many other political dynasties in the country, had ruled their province as a personal fiefdom, using violence and intimidation to maintain their power. Over the years, they had built a network of loyalists within the local police, military, and judiciary, making it difficult for the prosecution to find impartial witnesses and secure convictions. The families of the victims, particularly the journalists, became vocal advocates for justice. They worked tirelessly to keep the memory of their loved ones alive, organizing protests, filing petitions, and pressuring the government to move the trial forward. International organizations such as Human Rights Watch, Reporters Without Borders, and the Committee to Protect Journalists also lent their support, drawing attention to the massacre and the lack of accountability. The trial itself was a grueling process, marked by frequent delays, witness intimidation, and allegations of bribery. Many of the defendants, including members of the Ampatuan family, used their wealth and influence to stall the proceedings, and some witnesses were murdered before they could testify. Despite these challenges, the families of the victims persevered, determined to see justice done. The verdict, a landmark decision. After nearly a decade of legal battles, the families of the victims finally received some measure of justice on December 19, 2019, when Andal Ampatuan Jr., his brother, Zaldi Ampatuan, and several other members of the Ampatuan family were convicted of multiple counts of murder. The court found that the Ampatuans had orchestrated the massacre in a bid to prevent Esmail Mangudadatu from challenging their political dominance. Andal Ampatuan Jr. and Zaldi Ampatuan were sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, a rare and significant punishment in a country where political violence often goes unpunished. In total, 43 individuals were convicted, while several others were acquitted due to insufficient evidence. The verdict was hailed as a landmark decision, not only for the families of the victims, but also for the fight against impunity in the Philippines. However, the case is far from over. Many of those involved in the massacre remain at large, and the conviction of the Ampatuan brothers is only the beginning of the long road to accountability. The families of the victims continue to push for the arrest and prosecution of all those responsible for the massacre, including those who enabled and protected the Ampatuans for years. The legacy of the Maguindanao Massacre. The Maguindanao Massacre remains a defining moment in the Philippines' modern history. It exposed the dark underbelly of the country's political system, where dynasties use violence and intimidation to maintain their grip on power. It also highlighted the dangers faced by journalists in the Philippines, a country that has long been one of the most dangerous places in the world for reporters. The massacre has left a lasting scar on the families of the victims, many of whom continue to suffer from the trauma of losing their loved ones in such a brutal and senseless act of violence. For the families of the journalists in particular, the massacre was not just an attack on individuals, but an assault on press freedom and the right to report on the truth without fear of retaliation. The Ampatuans may have been convicted, but the underlying issues that led to the massacre, political dynasties, impunity, and corruption, remain entrenched in the Philippines. While the convictions were a step in the right direction, the fight for justice and accountability is far from over. Conclusion: a nation's wound. The Maguindanao Massacre is a story of unimaginable violence and a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power. It revealed the lengths to which some political figures will go to maintain their hold on power, even if it means committing mass murder. But it is also a story of resilience, as the families of the victims fought tirelessly for justice in the face of overwhelming odds. As the Philippines continues to grapple with the legacy of the massacre, the nation must confront the deeper issues that allowed such an atrocity to occur in the first place. Until the culture of impunity is dismantled, and until those in power are held accountable for their actions, the risk of another massacre will always linger. The Maguindanao Massacre may have taken place over a decade ago, but its memory remains fresh in the minds of the victims' families and in the collective consciousness of the Filipino people. It is a wound that will take generations to heal, and the quest for justice is far from over. This is a detailed account of the Maguindanao Massacre, exploring the political background, the horrific events of the massacre, and the long, difficult fight for justice that followed. It highlights the toxic mix of politics, corruption, and violence that define this tragedy and the deep scars it left on the nation. The story has come to an end, but stay relaxed. If you feel yourself drifting off to sleep, just let the video play and enjoy the soothing music in the background. Let it guide you gently into rest. We'll be here, bringing you more stories every night. Sleep well, and see you tomorrow at 8 p.m.